The noise hit me like a freight train. I ran to the dock just in time to see the floating restaurant Sank, half submerged in the middle of my lake. Lights flickered and debris floated in the water as workers scrambled in a panic. I should have been celebrating, but instead, my heart was pounding with something darker. I hadn't just stopped their construction. I had taken back something they couldn't understand. Control. And I wasn't done yet. What I had planned next would bury them, literally. But even I wasn't prepared for what came next. Cheryl Blake didn't just lead the HOA, she ruled it. Tall, impeccably dressed, with sharp eyes that never missed a thing, she had the kind of authority most people would kill for. But she didn't earn it through kindness or respect. No, Cheryl's power came from her ability to make people feel small. The moment I met her, I could tell she saw me as just another obstacle in her way. A relic, a man too caught up in his grief to fight back. The first time we spoke was at the HOA office after I'd delivered the cease and desist. She greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, her voice calm but laced with an unmistakable edge. "Mr. Holloway," she said, her tone polite, but every word was a command. "I understand you've raised concerns about the lake." I didn't answer her pleasantries. I just handed her the letter. "It's not a concern, it's a trespass. This lake is private property, and you have no claim here." She folded her arms, leaning in just a bit too close. "We have extensive documentation suggesting otherwise." I'd seen that look before. The smug certainty of someone who believed they were untouchable. But I wasn't afraid. I knew exactly what I was up against, and I was just getting started. I didn't move back to the lake for peace, not at first. I moved because everything else was a reminder of what I had lost. Sarah and Jake, gone in an instant. People talk about grief like it's something you just get over, but there's no timeline for it, no neat little box to check. After the crash, I wanted silence, solitude, the kind of silence where your pain can scream without anyone else hearing it. The lake was the last place that hadn't changed. I inherited the land from my Uncle James, a quiet man who spent his life studying water systems. He wasn't the sentimental type. The cabin was old but sturdy, nestled on the edge of a lake so deep and still it seemed to swallow all sound. The world could go on turning, but the lake would always be the same. For months I did nothing but sit on the dock and watch the fog rise in the morning, the way the sunlight shattered across the water like fractured glass. I didn't touch the internet. I didn't talk to anyone. The HOA was the last thing on my mind. In fact, I didn't even know we had one. There were signs along the main road, sure, but they always seemed more like decoration. The subdivisions, Fresh Pine Village and Willow Bend, were miles from my land. And as far as I knew, my property wasn't part of their jurisdiction. Or so I thought. Then came the letter. It was a small envelope, no return address, just the words Fresh Pine Lakeside HOA Notice of Community Integration. I almost laughed when I read it. Shared amenity space. The lake I had spent my life on was being voluntarily designated as part of a development. Shared? I didn't share this place with anyone. Not with the HOA, not with anyone. I threw it in the fire, convinced it was just some bureaucratic mistake. But the feeling in my gut told me I was wrong. And a few weeks later, when I saw the pontoon boats and the survey markers, I knew something was off. They weren't asking for permission. They were taking it. I didn't expect the HOA to make its move so fast, but it did. 2 weeks after that first letter, I was sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee when I saw it. A pontoon boat, 2 men in polos, laughing and chatting like they owned the place, drifting toward the center of the lake. They weren't fishing. They weren't even enjoying the view. They were taking measurements. I shouted at them from the dock, telling them they were trespassing. They didn't flinch. One waved lazily, as if I was some neighbor they'd known for years. The next morning, I went down the hill to find orange flags tied to trees, marking out sections of the lake's shoreline. Survey stakes had been hammered into the earth, their plastic tape fluttering in the wind like some sick mockery. As I followed the trail, I came to a laminated sign zip-tied to a willow tree, site approved for floating platform development. Fresh Pine HOA. I felt a knot tighten in my chest. I called the number at the bottom, but it went straight to voicemail. This was no mistake. They were moving forward, and they had no intention of asking for permission. By the end of that week, things escalated. I came out one morning to find a flatbed truck backed onto the old gravel maintenance road, unloading lumber and steel framing. They weren't using the main road. No, they were cutting across my land, just like it was theirs. I called the sheriff, Deputy Nolan, a kid I'd known from high school. He showed up, looking uncomfortable in his uniform as I handed him my deed, showing that the lake and all surrounding land were mine. No HOA claim, no community right to it. Nolan walked down to the workers, had a brief conversation with them, then came back to me with a shrug. They say they've got permission from the HOA, but I can't confirm that without a property dispute process. That takes time. I didn't need time. The lake didn't have time. They were building and the clock was ticking. The following week I watched them work. It was like they were daring me to stop them. They started constructing a platform on the lake, right in the middle. No permits, no legal rights, just a floating structure anchored to the water, bolted together like some kind of fortress. By the time I called the sheriff again, it was too late. The platform was up, and they had already begun adding a roof frame. The workers laughed and played music as if nothing was wrong. I went down to the county office that afternoon with the deeds, maps, and even an old aerial map my uncle had kept. The county clerk pulled up the digital files, gave me a quick look, and shook her head. No shared rights recorded. No HOA jurisdiction. This lake is yours, Mr. Holloway. But that didn't matter to the HOA. They didn't stop. They just kept building. I watched the structure rise every day from my porch, and the more it went up, the more I felt my blood pressure rise. They were mocking me, mocking my claim. Mocking the land that had been in my family for decades. With no real help from the sheriff, I had no choice but to take it to the next level. I filed an official complaint with the county zoning board, hired an attorney, and started gathering evidence. But in the meantime, the construction continued. I could see the workers coming and going, grinning and waving. The more I watched, the more it became clear. They thought they were invincible. They weren't worried about the legal fight. They were betting on my silence. Then one morning I walked down to the dock to find one of the workers casually smoking a cigarette on the platform. He saw me standing there, glaring, but didn't even bother to move. This was no longer just about a construction project. It was personal. The next phone call was the last straw. The HOA had filed for visual access rights on the lake. That's right. They were claiming that because the lake was visible from the nearby subdivisions, they had a right to develop it. It was absurd. I wasn't going to let them bulldoze my property. I wasn't just fighting for my land. I was fighting for my family's legacy. The breaking point came one Sunday night. The music from the restaurant's test-run speakers shook the walls of the cabin. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a megaphone and stormed down to the dock, shouting at them to turn it off. "Shut it down or I'll press criminal charges," I yelled. The response came from the deck in a mocking, sing-song voice. "Go back to bed, old man." That was it. I snapped. The next morning, I knew I had no other choice. I had to act before they completed the structure. I couldn't wait any longer for courts or lawyers. I'd tried every legal channel and they had dismissed me at every turn. The lake was mine and I wasn't going to let anyone take it from me. I walked down to the old hatch, opened it, and climbed into the underground vault where my uncle had once taught me how to operate the low-pressure drainage system. It was time to remind them who owned this place. I wasn't just going to stop their development. I was going to bury it. It was a crisp morning when I saw Cheryl Blake step out of her shiny new office building. She was walking toward a group of investors, clipboard in hand, her face tight with that practiced smile. She caught sight of me before I could turn away, and I knew this confrontation was inevitable. I wasn't here to be polite. I wasn't here to negotiate. I was here to end this. "Mr. Holloway," Cheryl called out, stepping toward me with that same fake friendliness. "I trust you've received the letter from our legal counsel?" "I've seen it," I said, holding up the envelope. "I'm not here for paperwork. I'm here to stop you from stealing my land." Her smile faltered for just a moment, just enough to let me know she hadn't expected me to push back like this. "You've already received the cease and desist. You're wasting your time." "No," I said, staring her down. "You're wasting yours." I slid my phone from my pocket and pulled up the drone footage. I had already sent it to every local news outlet, the zoning board, my attorney. I wasn't just standing on principle anymore. I had proof. I handed her a printed photo of the illegal anchors drilled into my land. "You've crossed the line," I said. "Now you're going to pay for it." Cheryl's eyes flicked nervously to the photo in my hands, then to the gathered group behind her. Her confident demeanor was cracking. I kept talking, each word deliberate. "I have evidence that shows you've built illegally on my land, unauthorized construction, destruction of private property. You didn't just mislead the community, you violated zoning laws and trespassed on my property. Your so-called visual access claims are nonsense. This lake was never meant for your development. It was never part of your community project." She opened her mouth to speak, but I wasn't done. I pulled up the aerial shots from my drone footage, showing the structure sinking lower into the water, the angle of the building already unstable. It was only a matter of time before it collapsed. "I've already filed a restraining order. The county's ruling is clear. Your project's illegal. And if you continue, I'll take you to court for every single dollar you've spent. The destruction of the lake, the damage to my land, and the environmental harm. You'll be responsible." Cheryl's face went pale, but she held her ground, crossing her arms defensively. "You think you can just ruin all of this? You're not the only one with power." I leaned in, keeping my voice low but clear. "I'm not the one ruining anything. You've done it all on your own." The next 24 hours were a blur. I couldn't shake the image of Cheryl's tight smile faltering as the weight of the truth sank in. But I didn't let up. I had the upper hand now. I'd been quiet for too long, but I was done waiting for the law to catch up. At 7:30 a.m. the following day, I woke to a text from my attorney. The restraining order was in effect. No construction could continue, and the HOA was officially on notice. I sent Cheryl a final warning email, reiterating the evidence and consequences. She didn't respond, of course not. But as the day wore on, the emails started flooding in. Local news stations wanted interviews. The HOA watchdog blog had already picked up the story and was preparing a full expose. I wasn't going to just win this legally. I was going to bury Cheryl and the HOA in public opinion. By noon, the construction had halted. The workers packed up and left, but not before leaving the floating restaurant in complete disarray. A few hours later, Cheryl's lawyer called my attorney to settle. I didn't take the call. I wasn't interested in more deals or apologies. The fight was over. But Cheryl wasn't done yet. That afternoon, she stood in front of the camera, her voice shaking as she gave a public statement to the news crew. "This was a devastating act of sabotage," she said. "We've worked tirelessly on this project, and now the lake's future is in jeopardy. This isn't over." Her words were desperate, but the community knew the truth. The cameras caught her face, exhausted, her eyes darting, knowing the tide had turned against her. She had underestimated me, and now the HOA was crumbling. The following days were a strange kind of relief. The sound of chainsaws and hammering that had plagued the air for weeks was gone, replaced by the quiet hum of nature slowly returning to my land. The lake, which had been defiled and exploited, began to heal in its own time. It wasn't fast. Nature never worked that way. But it was steady. The waterline shifted, the fish returned, and the birds began their songs once more. I spent my mornings sitting by the lake, watching it breathe again. I didn't have to fight anymore. The fight had been won, not just for the lake, but for me. For Sarah and Jake. For the life we had built here, in the silence. The people who had supported me were few, but they were enough. The Wilkinsons were the first to come by, offering their apologies and thanking me for showing the courage to stand up. I nodded, accepting their gratitude, but it wasn't just about fighting for what was mine. It was about standing firm when everyone else expected me to give up. It was the first time in months that I felt anything other than numb. I could finally let go of the grief, the anger. It all started to shift back into something more peaceful. The neighbors had been quiet at first, but soon I started to hear murmurs of support. Word of the battle had spread, and slowly some of them started to look at me differently. Not with fear or pity, but with respect. By the time the dust settled, the HOA was nothing more than a memory. Cheryl Blake had been forced to resign, her reputation shattered. The rest of the board followed quickly after, one by one, each one acknowledging their part in the fiasco. But it didn't end with their departure. The courts ruled in my favor on every count: illegal construction, trespassing, defamation, environmental harm. The HOA was slapped with hefty fines, and Cheryl herself was held personally responsible for the damage caused by the development. In the end, I won far more than just legal battles. The settlement from the HOA's insurance came with the kind of stipulations that made it impossible for them to ever touch the lake again. They had to agree to a full public admission of wrongdoing, a binding agreement that Fresh Pine HOA would never again try to annex, develop, or control the land in any way. I signed it. The battle was over, and the lake would be mine again, permanently. A few weeks later, I received a visit from a young couple who had recently moved into the area. They brought with them a wrapped gift, a framed watercolor painting of the lake, serene, quiet, untouched. In the background, I saw the subtle outlines of two figures, a woman and a young boy, holding hands as they walked along the shore. The woman smiled gently as she handed me the painting. "We just wanted to say thank you," she said, "for standing up for what's right. We didn't know the HOA had done all that until we read about it. But we've seen what you've done, and it inspired us." The words hit me harder than I expected. There were no grand gestures, no fireworks, just the quiet acknowledgement that someone had noticed, that I had made a difference. I hung the painting above the fireplace next to Sarah's photo. It felt right, like a small piece of the past finding its place in the present. As the days passed, the story of the battle at Fresh Pine Lake started to fade from the headlines. But for me, it would never be forgotten. The lake was still healing, just like I was. And even as I watched the contractors clean up the last of the wreckage, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The town had seen the truth, and the lake would never again be used for someone's greed. The final hearing in the courthouse was swift and brutal. The judge ruled in my favor on every count: illegal construction, property damage, trespass, and environmental harm. Cheryl Blake was ordered to pay restitution personally. The rest of the HOA board was cleared of wrongdoing, but it was clear they had been manipulated and misinformed. The judgment was final, and for the first time, I felt the rush of vindication. I wasn't just the man who had lost everything. Now, I was the one who had taken it back. I didn't attend the board's official dissolution. The community didn't need another show. They'd already seen what was left behind after Cheryl's last, desperate attempt at control. I was content to let the lake speak for itself. As the months went by, life returned to normal, or at least what my new normal was. I spent my days restoring the dock, fixing what had been broken, replacing rotting wood with new beams. It was a small, solitary task, but it felt important. Every nail I hammered, every board I replaced, I thought of Sarah, of Jake, of the life we used to have here. I worked quietly, alone, but in a way, it felt like I wasn't alone at all. In the spring, when the snow began to melt and the water started to rise again, I took my canoe out into the center of the lake, just as I had when Sarah first told me she was pregnant. I sat in the stillness, watching the water ripple gently beneath me. The lake wasn't just a body of water. It was a sanctuary, a place that had held everything I had loved and lost. And now, it was mine again. The HOA was gone, Cheryl Blake's ambitions sinking like the restaurant she tried to build on my land. There would be no more surprises, no more intrusions. The lake had been saved, and with it, a piece of me.